As if there wasn't already enough to do in combat, the game also has something called geo-panels, which is something that you really need to pay attention to. Geo-symbols in this game are basically randomized effects. If a geo-panel is on a colored panel on the ground, then it will cause a certain effect to take place for anybody standing on the same color. For example, it could poison people, or it could silence them. Or, even better, it could give you a boost to your stats, or a boost to the enemy's stats. It's something that you really have to pay attention to, and a lot of the maps in the game absolutely depend on you trying to work around negative effects on a geo-panel. But it's just so damn satisfying when you finally set off that chain reaction and watch the entire map just explode with color. And exploding things are fun. And oh my god, if ever there was a game for a rabid perfectionist, this would be it. I've already mentioned that you can level up your items in this game, but what I didn't mention was the fact that there is essentially no stat cap in this game. You could theoretically keep raising your stats to infinity if you are clever enough. And the level cap in this game? Well, Vegeta, you want to help me out with this?
It's over 9,000! What, 9,000?!
Yes it is. More specifically, the level cap in this game, 9,999. While you will be able to beat the main storyline without really power leveling your characters, maybe once or twice throughout the entire game, well, after that, when you gain access to many of the hidden and post-story maps, which many of them lead to hidden endings, and believe me, this game has a lot of hidden endings, you will not be able to beat those maps, or even stand a chance against them, unless you level up your party well into the 1,000 digits. And speaking of characters, it is here that I really must address the game's biggest and, in my opinion, only flaw. And that's the fact that its generic character classes are not very well balanced at all. Apart from story characters, there are a huge amount of generic class characters that you can create at your whim. While your selection is originally very limited, you can start unlocking classes as you move through the plot. They are divided mainly into two different groups, human classes and monster classes, and this is where the big divide is. Monster classes are pretty inferior to human classes who are on the same tier as them, and this is for a couple of reasons. While monster classes are generally a bit easier to unlock than human classes, and they also have 4 unique special attacks that are unique for each class, they unfortunately cannot lift or throw anybody, and they're also limited to one kind of weapon, whereas humans can equip guns, bows, swords, axes, staves, and what have you. Monsters are limited to just using monster-only weapons. This pretty heavily hampers monsters that are basically intelligence-oriented, such as ghosts or reapers, because monster-only weapons only really raise attack, meaning that they will never be able to cause as much damage as attack-oriented monsters, and they also won't be able to cast spells as powerfully as clerics, skulls, or witches. But even the human characters are vastly outclassed by classes that are unlocked later on. And yeah, I get that a class that you need to work to unlock should be more powerful, but this game way overdid it. By the time you reach the end of the game, you'll have unlocked Angelic Hosts and Majin, the 2 most powerful human classes in the game, which makes using almost every other generic class completely useless. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I play a game like this, I like to have a big variety on my team. I like having a lot of monsters, and I like having a lot of different humans. I don't like having to handicap myself just to have variety on my team, but that's what happens. If you don't fill your team with Majin and Celestial Hosts, you're effectively giving yourself a huge handicap. But luckily, that is the biggest complaint that I have about this game, and even with that handicap, it is still a lot of fun to play. So let's move on from gameplay, at last, and take a look at something else that I'm sure a lot of people are split on, and that's the graphics. Almost all of Nippon Ichi Software's games use the same basic graphical ideas, using sprites for the characters against 3D designed battlegrounds and using painted character cells for the conversation areas. Sometimes they're animated and sometimes they're not. Now, some people like to complain that this is way too retro and that it hasn't been used since the Super Nintendo and whatnot, but I am going to vehemently argue against that. I really like this kind of art style, and I think it fits the kind of goofy, lighthearted tone that they were really going for. Not to mention, the animation on the sprites are actually really well done, and they're a joy to watch. The special techniques also look fantastic, and some of the later attacks that you gain in the game are really damn impressive. While it might not be pushing the PS2 very graphically, it certainly does make up for that by working with what it has. Now, I've already stated how awesome the music in this game is in my OMG OST review of the compilation soundtrack that came with Disgaea 3, but I will reiterate my stance that all the music in this game is awesome and fits the mood really well. You've been listening to the soundtrack pretty much through the entire review anyway. However, I will admit that some of the sound effects in the game, on the other hand, are kind of low grade, but at the same time they're really charming and they work very well with the kind of graphical style that the game has inherited. Now, voice acting, on the other hand, is a bit of a mixed bag. Nobody here gives a bad or awful performance in any way. All of the characters sound just fine, but sometimes it sounds like the voice actors just weren't really trying, or were trying a little too hard, and that really comes through in the English dub.
Jennifer's thighs. Pervert, pervert, pervert.
Anyways, why are all those weapons behind you? Well, I was having a hard time waking you up.
Unforgivable! That is unforgivable!
However, the voice acting for the English dub is relatively solid, aside from a few hiccups here and there, and a few actors that do sound like they're trying a little bit too hard. Overall, the game is extraordinarily solid and a whole lot of fun to play, and it has aged incredibly well. If I haven't made it abundantly clear by now, I love this game, and I recommend it to everyone. You can actually pick it up pretty cheaply now, as the original PS2 version goes for about $10 to $25, depending on how complete you want it. And the best part is, it's actually been ported to a handheld system. Twice. Oh yes, following on the success of its sequel, the original Disgaea was re-released on both portable platforms, the DS and the PSP. The first one, notably called Disgaea DS, was released, and then the PSP version, which was given a more unique title, Disgaea Afternoon of Darkness, was released. Both of these games actually had a player versus player option, which was not available in the original, and they also had a hidden campaign where you could play as Etna as the main character. And trust me folks, as good as the first game in this series is, it only goes up from here. So please join me next time as we take a look at Disgaea's sequel, Cursed Memories.
fists of a dark karate master, the legs of the fastest demon in the netherworld, the brain of Mahogany, a famous sorcerer, the iron body of Hercules, and a horse wiener!
Take a dump on the face of common sense!